Welcome to Week 5 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Carson Fox, and this week our focus turns to the Grove City College Wolverines, who are hungry to break a 13-game losing streak after fighting through 3 hard-fought games to open 2015. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program, highlight the week that was, and preview Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the upcoming weekend. Make sure to stay tuned following the Football Focus. 2 other Waynesburg University students and I will bring you the PAC Pregame Show. We'll take a look back at Week 4 and bring you the headlines of Week 5, which is shaping up to be potentially the best week of football so far this season in the PAC. Grove City head coach Chris Smith is the longest tenured head coach and the dean of football coaches in the President's Athletic Conference. He's won more games than any head coach in school history, and dating back to his days as a player and assistant coach, he's been involved in nearly 400 games, though some of his fondest memories of Grove City College come away from the gridiron.
The most important thing, and I think anyone will tell you this, wherever they've been, if they've enjoyed it, is the people, the relationships you've had with people, over the years, going back to as a student and being here and those friends at that time and seeing so many of them at this past homecoming, and former players who were at the homecoming, some came long distances to wish me well and see me one more time while I was still coaching. So those are very important things that give you insight into hopefully some of the important things that you were able to do as a coach with these young men. But if you had to come down to something that was the maybe brightest light, the R.J. Bowers years, you could not duplicate them again.
It was announced after the 2014 season that this was going to be Smith's last year as the head coach, and he says it's been a smooth transition for both he and offensive coordinator Andrew DiDonato, who will be Grove City's head coach next season. Smith has nothing but high praise for his former player and successor.
Played here, played for me. I coached him personally. Outstanding young man, great friend of mine. It's a great transition. He came in January. We worked together. He's my head coach in waiting, and we're making this a transition that's good for both of us.
As Smith spends his last season in the head coaching chair, he said there's been a balance between instilling some of his final coaching words of wisdom, while at the same time letting DiDonato be his own coach.
Kind of like an everyday thing. All coaches need to always remember one thing, that they have to be their own person, and they can take points of interest or points from someone else's personality or the way they handle things, but at the end of the day, you have to take all that in and at the same time have that conform to your personality, because you're never going to be as effective as you could be unless you, first of all, are yourself.
Grove City is currently riding a 13-game losing streak after finishing 2014 winless for the first time since 1972 and losing 3 competitive contests to begin 2015. Smith has a few reasons as to why the team has struggled during this challenging stretch of games.
It's probably the transition from a period where we had 2 starting quarterbacks that were here 4 years each. So we had an 8-year period there where things were, pretty competitive, and, especially 6 of those last 8 were, really enjoyable. And we went into a little bit of a dip in our senior class. Last year we only had like 9 or 10, and not too many of them played, and we played 4 quarterbacks. And we're just trying to, again, what we need to do is establish a base for this program to build on. And, that's what we're trying to do. We've been close the last 3 weeks. We'll be, in the fight again this weekend. So right now the task of our football program is to establish a base, something we can stand for, something we can be constant with, and then build on that base to get back into a competitive environment.
Smith believes that righting the ship begins with successful and confident play from Grove City's quarterbacks. And to begin the season, the Wolverines started newcoming junior Antonio Carosha behind center. According to Smith, Carosha was initially interested in Grove City out of high school, but elected to follow in his father's footsteps to play at Division I Kent State. After 2 years of sparing playing time, he's joined the Grove City program. But after leaving last week's game with an injury, there may be other quarterbacks on the roster in the fold for playing time.
We feel he has a lot of ability, and we feel he can be an excellent quarterback. He basically had 2 years of very, intense practicing, but not any game time. So, it takes you a little bit of time to knock some of the rust off and to adjust to a new system. And so, he's in the hunt for that, and I think he's very qualified to be our quarterback. We have a young man who finished our game last week as Tony had an injury, and that's Matt Pennypacker. And Matt also came in and added some excitement to it, threw the ball for over a couple hundred yards. So, one of those two or someone else, can rise to the top. You never know for sure who's going to produce when they do get their opportunity. But over the years, I have found that whenever you have years that are good and, productive and competitive, you usually have a good and productive and competitive quarterback.
After rushing the ball for over 100 yards as a team for the first time in 4 games dating back to last year, Smith believes that the ground game has turned a corner and can help augment the offense while the quarterback situation plays itself out.
Obviously, the first 2 weeks, our running numbers were, very, very, low. So it's something we have addressed, and I think we're going to try to tweak the offense a little bit so we can, get a few more runs in that maybe we haven't used for the first couple of weeks. We have a couple running backs we feel are very talented, and we just need to find the best way to give them the opportunity to be successful.
After spending much of last season fluctuating between wide receiver and quarterback, senior Josh Peach has found his home at receiver, and he and junior Brett Pinson have excelled through 3 games, combining for 31 catches for 485 yards and 5 touchdowns. With another pass catcher in the fray, Smith believes a core of skill position players is being built for whoever starts at quarterback moving forward.
Well, in the 3 games, Brett has been our player of the week offensively twice and Josh once. And they have the ability to go get the ball. They're good, talented athletes. We have another split end, Tyler Patterson, who also has shown, some really outstanding plays and catching balls that just didn't seem like they're going to be caught. So those 3 are really important in giving our young quarterbacks a chance to get the ball to somebody who's going to make a play. Because however good a quarterback is, obviously they're a little better. They have some quality they're throwing to, and we feel we have a receiving core that may be as good as we've had for a long, long time.
Despite the recent stretch of losses, Grove City has maintained its mindset of being one of the upper echelon defenses in the PAC. Most notably, the Wolverines are second in the conference in total defense, third in pass defense, and second best at getting opposing offenses off the field on third down. Smith likes what he has defensively to keep his offense in games.
I think that this year's defense, the heart of it is, a senior-led linebacking core, and then we have some talented young defensive linemen that, are really doing a very good job. They have the ability, they have the talent. It's nice to see them make progress every week, because we have about 2 or 3 sophomores in that group that are playing. Secondary has come in and was very young last year, and again, they're still young this year. I mean, they were infants last year, but this year we're playing about 3 sophomores, and they're playing well. So the exciting part about that defensive scheme is it looks good today, and as we go through the season and keeping people healthy, they should get better every week.
Opposing offenses will have to account for returning all PAC honorable mention senior linebackers Brandon Behringer and Bobby Tuttle, who have already combined for 64 tackles on the season. But according to Smith, they mean more to this team than just on-field production.
The one thing I said about having a good year and a competitive year and a year that you're happy with is you have to have a good quarterback. Well, the other thing you have to have is good senior leadership. And those two give us excellent senior leadership. They've been on the field for a couple of years now. Bobby played quite a bit even as a freshman. So when you have 2 senior linebackers, and most defenses right now are geared towards covering and making it hard for the offensive linemen to get to your linebackers and then letting the linebackers make plays. These 2 guys, are very good at that. Brandon probably has as good a quickness as any linebacker we've had, and Bobby Tuttle is quick enough and very tough at the same time. So, those 2 are big parts of the defensive success.
Last week, the Wolverines fell to St. Vincent 48-28 on homecoming, in a game that was all too familiar recently to fans, as Grove City once again proved to be its own worst enemy because of costly mistakes.
We had some miscues in the first quarter that just, right now we have to eliminate self-inflicted wounds. We had a blocked punt, and we had another punt where the snap hit the protector. In both cases, St. Vincent was able to not just turn them into touchdowns, pick the ball up and run it in for a touchdown. So they did not even have to run an offensive play. And then we had another pick 6. So if you take 3 scores, I would love to have my opponent give me 3 scores in a game, because, you're not going to lose too often when you have that type of turnover and points produced from that turnover. So that was a huge difference. It kept us from really, making it a close, hard-fought contest coming down the stretch.
This week, Grove City has Waynesburg on the road in a game in which both teams will be hungry for their first PAC win on the season. For Grove City to win this contest and break the losing streak, Smith says it's all about correcting the mistakes that have plagued his team through 3 games this season.
We have to eliminate the things that have caused our problems so far in 3 games we've played. If you would eliminate about an 8 to 10 minute period in each game where we had turnovers that were converted into touchdowns every single week, we win. We'd be 3-0. We can't change that. We're not. So what we have to do is not have the self-inflicted wound that we have had so far this season.
Looking down the road in what is Smith's final season, he hopes that his players take a week-by-week approach toward Grove City's opponent and they continue to bring the fire that has burned inside of him since he took the field as a Wolverine defensive back in the late 1960s.
I always tell the players that you need to have your mind set on what your vision is. And, vision is essential for success. But you better keep your eyes on the ground right in front of your feet, because if your mind and eyes are only on the vision, you're going to stumble over something you didn't expect. So you have to be able to do both. The thing that you really focus on as far as what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. What's acceptable is an attitude of effort, an attitude of, what do I stand for, whether things are up or things are down, a level of expected intensity. Those are the things you can control, and those are the things that really label you as, what you are and what you're going to be. And, sometimes things happen one way or another that you don't have control over. But those things you do control. How hard you're going to play, how long you're going to play hard. And, if you do that long enough, you will always be successful.
Thanks again to head coach Chris Smith and Grove City College for being featured as this week's PAC Football Focus. Coming up next week, we'll focus on the Teal College Tomcats and head coach Kurt Reiser, who are looking to make their mark in conference play on what is still a young season. Stay with us. After the break, it's the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org.
I'm Joe Underko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student-athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
Welcome back. It's the PAC Football Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org. And guys, it's week 5, potentially the best football action in the President's Athletic Conference up to this point in the season. We'll get into each matchup breakdown, including the 2 nationally ranked powers at the top of the conference in Thomas More and W&J. We'll get into that a bit later. I want to take a look back at week 4. What were some of the intriguing games that crossed your mind after week 4?
Well, really, for me, coming into this week, I was very interested in seeing how a Westminster team that pushed W&J to the brink would respond. In a game against Thomas More, the Saints' first time on the road, and the Saints certainly answered the bell, jumping up 45-0 in that game before getting to your 45-14 final. That really impressed me. That sets the stage now for the showdown with W&J, both teams unbeaten, the only 2 teams unbeaten left in the PAC. But otherwise, I'm really surprised seeing some higher scores this season in the PAC. 3 teams broke 40 points. The lowest scoring winning team was 27 points. Some fireworks last week in quite a few unbalanced games. We've got a few better matchups coming this week.
I was really impressed by the St. Vincent defense last week against Grove City. Very seldomly will you see 3 special teams / defensive touchdowns. St. Vincent pulled that out of the hat. 28-yard block punt return, 35-yard fumble and interception return. Evan Sheminsky was back. St. Vincent looked good, looked to the form it was at against Waynesburg a couple weeks ago. We'll see if St. Vincent can continue to make strides. They were my highlight point of the week.
I think the team that was most impressive in Week 4 had to be Carnegie Mellon. And we're starting to sound like a broken record, but running back Sam Benger was incredible again. 28 carries, 194 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns, despite Andrew Herron just passing for 104 yards on the day. But how about this defense that had been woeful through its first 2 games, shutting out Geneva in the second half and allowing only 7 points on the entire day and 274 yards of total offense. And then on the flip side, what a letdown for Geneva, who was playing this contest at home, riding high after that big win against Waynesburg. And it was a question I brought up: would we see the versus Waynesburg Aaron Channing or the versus the rest of the PAC Aaron Channing? And he was just 12 for 27 for 142 yards and an interception on the day while getting sacked 3 times. Carnegie Mellon may be just hitting its stride at the perfect time that it needs. And same with Thomas More. Andy, I like what you had to say, but it was a different kind of game than we saw last year with C.T. Tarrant and Dominique Hayden rushing for over 400 yards. We didn't see it was Chenson Gebhardt being efficient, 15 for 22 for 307 yards and 2 touchdowns. Did have the 2 interceptions in this contest, though. And then Rob Kuda, right up there with Benger for the watch list of PAC's best offensive player. 250 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, 91 yards and a touchdown on the ground. The Spartans coming up big with a 41-6 win over Teal, flexing their dominance. All right, guys, well, let's get into our first matchup of the week. A 1 o'clock kickoff in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. The Teal Tomcats on the road at the St. Vincent Bearcats. Teal 1-3 overall, 0-2 in PAC play. St. Vincent 2-2, 1-1 in PAC play. And looking back at last year's game, 21-20 win for St. Vincent at Teal. A false start penalty with just over 6 minutes to play in the fourth quarter pushed St. Vincent kicker Morgan Porter's field goal attempt 5 critical yards to set up the potential game winner, down 1 from 42 yards away. Missed the kick. Teal was able to run the ball to kill the clock on a day in which Teal's offense rushed for 310 yards on the day and 2 touchdowns. And Teal's won the last 3 contests, but it was just a 1-point victory at home. What do we see in this matchup?
Well, Teal is a team that has quite a few issues that it needs to sort out coming into this PAC season. After losing 40-6 last week against Case Western, getting outgained essentially 500 yards to 250 yards. And Ryan Radke in that game, 13 for 27, 166, 2 interceptions, only 28 yards on the ground, sacked 4 times. You look at last season, Ryan Radke was the 4th leading rusher, 5th in passing, and this season he's not even on the rushing leaderboards, and 7 quarterbacks have thrown for more yards per game than him. And really, Rob Kuda has filled the void of an explosive playmaker and a dual-threated quarterback. He's top 5 in rushing and 2nd in passing. And you look at this team, last in scoring offense, last in scoring defense, a 43-18 average margin, 10th in total defense, giving up over 450 yards a game. And this team, as Teal always does, leads the PAC in offensive plays and time in possession, but they're last in scoring offense and scoring defense, which means they can't score and the opponents score very, very quickly. Now, it's not turnovers that's sinking this team. They're even in the turnover margin, but giving up 5.8 yards per carry, that's a problem. They've also given up 7 red zone touchdowns and allowed 17 touchdowns of 20 yards or more this season. Explosive plays are killing the Tomcats, and as you mentioned in our open, Sean, St. Vincent has been able to do that defensively and on the special teams. They were outstanding last week.
Yeah, St. Vincent, I'll break down to the defense for you as a unit last week. 10 tackles for loss, a forced fumble and fumble recovery, 3 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, 1 blocked punt, 4 sacks, 5 quarterback hits.
Whoa.
The way Teal has been playing as of late, Ryan Radke will be more than likely running like a chicken with his head cut off. Just not to be mean to Ryan Radke, but he hasn't been the quarterback we've seen in the past. He's been one-dimensional this year, having to throw the ball more than he's capable of running. Again, as Andy alluded to, 13 of 27 for 166 and 2 interceptions, averaged 1 yard a carry in the game, had a rushing touchdown again. Ryan Radke continues to score using his legs on the ground, but he's been the only offensive consistency from this Teal team right now. In St. Vincent, if you think that they're going to give up 300 yards on the ground this year, this defense is a lot better. Evan Shemensky was back last week, 11 of 19 for 141, a touchdown and a pick. So an average day by Evan Shemensky. We've seen better out of him. But the one name that we continue to not see much of this season, Shavonte Craft, 10 carries and only 43 yards on the day. Will we see a breakout for Shavonte Craft? Will we see a breakout for Ryan Radke? I think those are the two big questions in today's game.
You hit it well, Sean. You very well said. I don't know what to make of this quarterback situation yet for St. Vincent between Evan Shemensky and Tyler Donahue yet. Both have shown flashes that each can lead this offense despite the poor start, as you mentioned, from Shavonte Craft. But it seems like this St. Vincent team is able to pull another 100-yard receiver out of its hat game in and game out, whether that's Ariel Martinez, Damon Black, DJ Ocean Kelly, Dustin Lohman. There are a lot of serviceable skill players on this St. Vincent offense. It just seems like there's still, I can't believe we're saying this after the Andy Borgen, Matt Deacons era from last year. I thought this was settled with Evan Sheminsky, but they're still trying to figure it out under center. And you said it well, Andy. Teal wants to get to its game, and that's running the football. We saw it week 1 against Allegheny, but they can't play Allegheny every single week. So they have to keep it within 2 possessions. It's almost like a high school offense that it uses a lot of clock. And that's what Teal likes to do. They like to run the football, but if the defense is going to give up big play after big play. In case in point, last week against Case Western Reserve, 41-6 final, but you take a look, Teal has the ball down 14-6 with 6.5 minutes remaining in the first half. Radke drives the ball 45 yards down to the Case 5-yard line, and after a timeout with 2 minutes remaining, throws an interception on 4th and goal. The Spartans take over, run 8 plays in under 2 minutes, come off a big play in which Kuda gets sacked, and then throws a 65-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Luke DiFrancesco. What a demoralizing play for Teal to go down 21-6 at half. Case scores on 2 big offensive gainers. KJ Peterson returns a block punt for a touchdown, and Radke throws a pick all in the third quarter. Game over, 41-6. So Teal is there. It just seems like we talk about, Chris Smith talked about in the PAC Football Focus some of the mistakes that Grove City's had. Case in point, all the plays that you mentioned earlier, Sean, with against St. Vincent last week. It just seems like the team's down at the very bottom of the conference right now. It's those costly mistakes that take them out of winnable games against juggernaut opponents. Any final thoughts on this game, guys?
Oh, finally, for St. Vincent, they just need to clean up the little things. They're last in terms of penalties. They're giving away 96 yards per game. They're last in terms of red zone offense. Only 3 touchdowns and 7 trips. We still have plenty of questions for the St. Vincent team. They have wins over Waynesburg and Grove City, but losses to Case Western and John Carroll. They might beat this Teal Tomcat team, but we still don't know how good this team really is. And with this 2-quarterback system, Donahue played the second half, Shemensky played the first half. I don't know what the ceiling for this team is, and we'll just have to see as the season progresses.
Allowing 453.2 yards per game is Teal 10th in the PAC, allowing 43.2 points per game in the PAC is Teal worst in the conference. Defense has to step up this week if they want a chance against the St. Vincent team that put up just 48 this past week.
All right, very well said, guys, but let's get into it. The big matchup, the matchup that we've been really previewing for weeks now. The number 13 team in the country, the Washington and Jefferson College Presidents, undefeated 3-0, 1-0 in PAC play, coming off a bye week last week, and at the number 12 team in the country, according to D3Football.com, the Thomas More Saints, 4-0, undefeated, and they are just really running over its opponents at will and dominating. They'll host this game, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Crestview Hills. But guys, in the last 3 matchups between these 2 schools, it's been one blowing out the other. W&J coming up with a 23-point win a year ago. W&J 2 years ago, a 24-point win, and in 2012, Thomas More, a 36-point win. And in last year's contest, a hotly contested game until the 4th quarter when the Saints turned the ball over 3 times, and W&J capitalized with points on those turnovers. And Pete Coughlin, what can you say? This was the best game of his career, 25 for 35, 383 passing yards, and 6 touchdowns. And even though Dominique Hayden was solid, 183 yards on 24 carries, carries and scored 3 touchdowns. It just wasn't a good contest for Jensen Gebhardt, completing under 50% of his passes and throwing 2 interceptions, as that win put W&J in the driver's seat for the PAC title before losing in the regular season finale to Waynesburg. Guys, what do we see in this matchup of 2 juggernauts in this conference?
We are seeing, if you make the analogy, the Superman of Thomas More meeting its kryptonite, that is W&J, the past 2 years. The turnover battle has been won by either team in the victory each time. And W&J last year forced 5 Thomas More turnovers, but surprisingly, in that 51-28 win, it only led to 10 W&J points. 41 points did not come off the turnovers. And last year, 2 names you didn't mention, Carson, Ryan Ruffing, 34 carries, 117 yards in what was really a quiet day for him last year, and a touchdown. But Dan List, the wide receiver, 9 receptions, 188 yards, and 3 touchdowns against what was a solid Thomas More defense. And what was surprising with the W&J defense last year was in the game, it only had 4 tackles for loss all game, but 3 were sacks on Jensen Gebhardt. Jensen Gebhardt, seeing him this year play, I've watched some film of him. He is a game manager now. He is doing everything at will for this team, including 15 of 22 for 307 last week and 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 interceptions. Kind of reminding me as a Aaron Rodgers, so to speak. Likes to manage the game, find different receivers, hand the ball off to his 2 great running backs in Tarrant and Pitts. And right now, the thing that Thomas More has to focus on in this game is not turning the ball over, because that is what has forced them to lose these 2 games against W&J. And then the year before, 2 years ago, it was a close contest at one point. It was 24-21. And then Dion Wiggins, a 92-yard kickoff return, changed the entire face of that game. W&J goes on to win 45-21.
For me, it boils down to 2 glaring things for each team. For W&J, it's run defense. For Thomas More, it's that turnover margin. For W&J, looking back at the Westminster and CMU games, Westminster only went 60-plus yards on W&J's defense 1 time. But it was at the end of the game, and it was 10 straight running plays to go 73 yards for the go-ahead touchdown with 2:26 to play, imposing their will on the President defense that has to get a stop in that situation. And then against Carnegie Mellon, 300 yards on the ground to Sam Banger, who, yes, is the Division III leading rusher in all of the nation, but W&J still able to corral the passing game there, only giving up 14 points. But when you give up runs of 51, 46, 85, 66 yards, there is certainly some issues there. They were good in the red zone, only allowing 1 touchdown. But look at this offense. They're back on track against CMU. That after struggling against Westminster, they ran 101 plays, 594 yards, 12 for 20 on 3rd down, Coughlin 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, Ruffing 230 yards and a touchdown. Sean, you mentioned how big of a role special teams played in an earlier meeting between these 2 games. The special teams unit for W&J has been outstanding. 2 punt returns led directly to touchdowns back in week 2, 4 returns of 30 or more yards in week 1. The team's averaging 19 yards a punt return. And defensively, I have no real complaints outside of the last drive of the game against Westminster, outside of running the football. Comparing this season to last season, very comparable in a number of categories. Same on 3rd down, better defensively on 3rd down, giving up less yards per game, averaging 82 plays per game compared to the 85 last season. This is a game where I think you see Ryan Ruffing get a ton of carries. They've been trying to keep his carries down. But on the other side with Thomas More, the glaring weakness is that even turnover margin. I'm not sure how much those numbers really matter considering the circumstances of those games, because Thomas Moore's been winning on it by an average of 59-8. But Jensen Gebhardt emerging into perhaps the best quarterback in the PAC, where it's almost unfathomable to believe that he only threw for 300 more yards in just a single game last season. He's leading the conference, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's got the best 2 receivers in the PAC, and Goose Cohorn and Tyler Vogelpool. It's going to be one heck of a football game in Crestview Hills, Kentucky this weekend.
Oh, I think so too, and I think it's going to be coming down really, you said it all about Jensen Gebhardt. It does fall on his shoulders. He's the quarterback. But the 2-headed monster in C.T. Tarrant of Javier Pitts make, I think, one of the best rushing tandems in the country. And against this W&J defense that you had the numbers, giving up 228 yards to opposing backs, we don't see W&J ever at the bottom of statistical categories, and right now they're last in rush defense. It's really hard to fathom in my opinion. I just really think that they're still looking for someone to replace Jared Pratt from a year ago. 136 tackles, your middle linebacker. It's hard to replace that production, and they're looking their best for it. But as you mentioned, Sean, the team that's won the turnover battle has been the winner in the last 10 contests. And right now, that's Thomas Moore's only problem. So W&J, you hit on all the points. I mean, the offense is finally coming alive. It just seems like it's going to come down to, can W&J stop the run, but can Thomas More control the ball and control this game in a winnable contest at home?
Well, here's the thing with W&J's run defense and why I believe that statistic for the run defense is skewed. You look at the first 3 weeks of the season. In 2 of those weeks, you face the top 2 rushers in all of the PAC in Dominique McKinley and Sam Banger. And now you get the bye week, and now you have to focus on C.T. Tarrant and Javier Pitts, 2 more of the top running backs in the PAC. So, but for W&J, I really what Andy said, between Goose Cohorn and Tyler Vogelpool, 2 of the best in the conference. But when you're W&J, you have Dan Liss, Jesse Zubik, Eric Scott.
Oh, they're right up there as well.
Yeah.
You have the best receiver tandems facing each other. One of the best running backs facing 2 great running backs, 2 great quarterbacks, 2 great defenses.
It's a great matchup.
This is a battle of 2 juggernauts. We've called them week in and week out, and that is what it's going to be. Who is strong in the trenches, who gives their running backs room, who blocks for their quarterback, who doesn't turn the ball over.
I think it comes down to Jensen Gebhardt and how he plays. That decides this game. He can either win the game, which is things that he's played like that the last few weeks, or he can lose the game like last season. 5 turnovers on his part, really. And Sean, you mentioned the points off turnovers, but also points that Thomas More didn't get by turning the football over and losing those opportunities. It's all on him.
All right, let's move on, guys. That, once again, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. Another 1 o'clock kickoff, this time in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania. We'll come north above the Mason-Dixon line. The Carnegie Mellon Tartans, 1-2, pick up their first win of the season last week in a 35-7 win at Geneva, 1-1 in PAC play at Westminster, who's 2-2, 1-1 in PAC play. And, guys, this is one of the more even series in the PAC. Westminster owns a 16-1 lead in the series, but in the last 2 years, it's been a 3-point win for Westminster and a 3-point win for Carnegie Mellon, and last year, a 27-24 CMU W at home, and this was one of the most exciting finishes of any game in the PAC last year. You recall, under 3 minutes to play in the fourth quarter, quarterback Andrew Herron led an 8-play, 60-yard touchdown drive to tie the game at 24. Carnegie Mellon then kicked off to Westminster, but 3 plays into the series, Paul Colombo threw an interception. The Tartans take the ball with 19 seconds remaining. The Westminster defense holds the Tartans, forces them to throw a Hail Mary on 4th down, and sacks Andrew Herron. But wait, a personal foul allows CMU to set up a 50-yard field goal, and what do you know? Tyler Coleman hits it as time expires. Tartans win, a heartbreaker for the Titans. The Titans coming off that 45-14 loss to Thomas More at home. CMU coming off a big win, as we mentioned, 35-7 on the road. What do we see in this matchup?
Really, for Westminster, it's commendable to the defense and the running game that they are as good as they are, considering that Paul Colombo has thrown for fewer yards than any other quarterback in the PAC and thrown more interceptions than any other qualifying quarterback in the conference. The fact is that Westminster's a top 4 or 5 team, even with those deficiencies from Colombo, who's only competing 55% of his passes, only throwing for 120 yards per game, and has twice as many interceptions as he has touchdowns. Now, I'm not sure that all falls on Colombo, seeing as his top 2 receivers are Demetrius Bentley and Mike Frankowski, and neither of those players play wide receiver. But they have the best running game in the conference. Dominique McKinley has been outstanding, 6 yards per carry, over 100 yards per game. Kimu Kim has proved himself as a nice short yardage back, 4 rush touchdowns in the season. Westminster is second behind Teal in time of possession, but they actually score the football. And defensively, they took a hit statistically after losing to Thomas More 45-14, but they shut down Thomas Moore's run game, only giving up 3.1 yards a carry, and Jensen Gebhardt had to beat him. And there's no shame in that, considering the season that Gebhardt's had so far. They're third in rush defense, giving up just under 130 yards per game, under 4 yards per carry, 13 takeaways, 9 interceptions, both first in the league, but only a +2 margin because the offense gives the ball away so often. But defense and takeaways are really the key for this team in beating Hiram, keeping close with W&J, and beating Bethany. Against Hiram, 3 forced turnovers, held Hiram scoreless after 3 giveaways, 2 turnovers on down, and a missed field goal. W&J, 2 scores directly from interceptions, and then Bethany, a momentum-changing pick 6 to go up 11 rather than down 3. And for CMU, the story has to be Sam Banger. Leads the PAC, leads the country in rushing, another 194 yards. As long as Andrew Herron is serviceable, which he was last week, 286 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But the last 2 games against W&J and Geneva have not been pretty, especially considering Banger has been putting up 9 yards a carry this season. No wide receivers caught more than 2 passes or gained more than 54 yards outside of week 1. And this defense, only 2 takeaways this season, last in the conference, and opponents are converting on 50% of their first downs, dead last in the PAC, as well as dead last in sacks with just 5 in 3 games. Really, CMU sort of underwhelming around Sam Banger and Drew Fitzmaurice on the other side, but those players are so good that they can keep them competitive for stretches at a time.
Yeah, but you know what? I have to credit this CMU defense for a bounce-back performance last week. We said last week, struggled through its first 2 games, go into Beaver Falls, a tough place to play against Geneva, pitched a second-half shutout, and only allowed 7 points to Geneva. This defense brought Aaron Channing back to earth after throwing for over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns against Waynesburg. He was just 12 for 27 for 142 yards and threw in interceptions. And you mentioned it, offensively, a subpar performance by Andrew Herron, but Banger, 194 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been sensational, but really I think the story of that game was defense. Sean, what do you think? Tartans, Titans.
Well, to add on to the Sam Banger notes here, he, as Andy said, leads Division III in rushing. He's also second in the entire nation between Division I, Division I AA, 2, and 3 in rushing, tied for second with Ramon Lee of D2 Glenville State, and is 23 yards behind D2 Cameron McDonald of Colorado State Pueblo for number 1 in the entire nation in rushing, but he leads the entire nation, all divisions, with 233.7 yards per game. If CMU, I think, wants to beat a good Westminster defense that was exposed by a very good offense in Thomas More, they have to be able to throw the ball. Andrew Herron didn't do that well last week. 9 of 16, just over 50% completion percentage, only 104 yards on the day. A one-dimensional offense with Sam Banger having to carry the workload with 28 rushes, yet again, as you said. But Carson agreed. The defense played well. And it goes back and you look at Brian Corey, 6 tackles, 2.5 for loss, and 1.5 sacks. 9 tackles for loss, an interception, and 3 sacks as a unit on the day. But for Westminster, it's the quarterback situation with Paul Colombo going 10 of 18 for 85 yards and 3 interceptions. Andy alluded to it again. Westminster can't turn the ball over. CMU needs to force turnovers. This game could go either way, but right now when you look at it, Sam Banger is going to lead Carnegie Mellon, and Paul Colombo has to come back to leading Westminster with Dominique McKinley.
Yeah, flip that around, Sean, in the turnovers. Westminster's forced a league-high 13, while Carnegie Mellon's only lost 4 this season, and 3 of them coming against W&J, yet the Titans have lost 11.
It goes both ways.
It does. It goes both ways, and I agree. I think it's just who's going to break fort first. Is it that Westminster rush defense that's currently 3rd best in the conference, allowing just 128 yards per game, or is it Sam Banger, who we've talked about him ad nauseum on the show, 9 yards per clip, 234 yards per game, and Dominique McKinley, very underrated. 429 yards rushing this season with Colombo currently struggling, and Carnegie Mellon continues to allow opposing offenses to convert on a league-high 50% of the time on 3rd down. So Westminster, I do think, is going to have chances, especially with this contest being played at home.
And one more quick note I have for you guys. This Westminster defense did not hit Jensen Gebhardt in any of his dropbacks except for the 1 sack they had last week. So if Westminster wants to contain Sam Banger, they have to win that battle against the offensive line and show that great front 7 that they have against Sam Bangor, unlike they were able to against Thomas More. Like I said, only hitting Gebhardt one time.
All right, let's move on. A 2 o'clock kickoff in Bethany, West Virginia. The Bethany Bison, fresh off a win against Waynesburg, 2-2 overall, 1-1 in PAC play, and Case Western Reserve, arguably the hottest team in the PAC, coming off a 41-6 win against Teal, 2-1, 2-0 in PAC play. Bethany's owned the edge in this series, 12-3, including owning the edge at home, 6-1. And we remember last year when this Bethany team hit its stride, winning its 4th straight game versus a PAC opponent, 24-14 on the road after beating Waynesburg in a close contest. In this matchup, Bethany used a balanced attack. Brandon Hill and Jalen Holmes managed 161 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns, while Brian Vales found Eric Blinn early and often as he put up a monster game, 15 receptions for 145 yards and a touchdowns, and the defense got to Billy Beecher 5 times on the day. But the Spartans battled tough. 5 guys had double-digit tackling totals in this game, but it all came down to one critical mistake. Case Western Reserve scored to make it a 5-point game, then Bethany was forced to punt, but Dan Cronin fumbled on the return. Bethany recovered deep in Case territory, and Jalen Holmes recovered a 4th and 2 for a 9-yard rushing touchdown to put the Bison ahead, and the Spartans couldn't counter. Guys, what do we see between 2 fairly even teams so far at this point in the season?
You mentioned multiple double-digit tacklers for Case Western last year in this contest, and for Case Western this year, they haven't needed that. So much depth on this defense. The leading tackler last week only had 6 on the day, and that was Dayton Snyder. Again, showing the depth that this defense has, and again, a great day by the unit overall. 7 tackles for loss, a forced fumble that was not recovered, but a forced nonetheless. 2 interceptions, 5 pass breakups, 5 sacks, blocked punt return for a touchdown. This Case Western team has proven that it is a legitimate threat this year in the PAC, and you can also thank Rob Kuda for that. 20 of 31 for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, added 8 rushes for 91 yards. Granted, one of those runs was a 73-yard touchdown run. 8 other players had carries equal to 91 yards on the team for the day for Case Western. 11 different receivers caught a pass, and for Bethany, took advantage of an ailing, injured Waynesburg secondary right now. And Lincoln Reyes, 342 and 2 touchdowns, set career highs in attempts, completions, and yards on the day. Jalen Holmes, another 100-plus yard rush day. You already mentioned him. Eric Blinn, another big day. Tyler Ambush, huge day, 6 receptions for 177. Also dropped what would have been a 61-yard touchdown pass later in the game. He could have easily been over 200 yards. But for Bethany, if they want a chance to beat Case Western, the defense has to play much better than it did against Waynesburg. Granted, it did play really well.
This is a really fun game because it's a benchmark game for both teams. Bethany to defend its position after falling to an upstart already in Westminster, and Case really to legitimize its standing as a top PAC team. And you look at this Case offense, averaging 40 points per game through 3 games. They didn't score 40 points in a single game last year. They went from 326 yards per game to almost 480 yards per game. Went from giving up 27 points per game to giving up 17 points per game. They've gone down 70 yards per game in yards allowed. And you look at last year, not having a ball carrier average over 40 yards per game rushing. Here's Rob Kuda, 98 yards on the ground per game, 5th leading rusher in the conference. Billy Beecher last season completing 56% of his passes, 16 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, only over 200 yards 3 times. Rob Kuda's over here this year completing 2/3 of his passes, 10 touchdowns without an interception, 339, 236, and 250 yards through the air in his first 3 games. He's only been sacked 4 times in these 3 games. The offense converts 44% of the time on 3rd down. And there's no weapons really lighting the world on fire with crazy numbers except for Rob Kuda and maybe Lynch. DeFrancesco, Brian Erb are all threats that have hurt other teams. And defensively, they have the best turnover margin in the PAC, best red zone defense, best run defense. Opponents convert on 3rd down 42% of the time, but they haven't converted on a 4th down yet this year. Case Western has really impressed me, but Bethany last week, we saw them come in here, do what they did against Waynesburg. Eric Blinn is really good. Donovan Hayden defensively really impressed me. PAC Defensive Player of the Week. 16 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 2 pass breakups. shoot, they could have been interceptions if he didn't have the giant cast on his hand.
Yeah.
He really impressed me defensively. Jalen Holmes, we came into this game concerned. If Waynesburg really tries to cover Eric Blinn with a couple of guys, can he have a big day? He did have a big day, over 100 yards. And Tyler Ambush, he can give this team a whole nother dimension if he plays like he did last week. He only came into the game with 6 catches for 110 yards, 6 for 177 and a touchdown in this game. As Sean mentioned, he could have had much more if one pass really goes their way. But Bethany, it's hard to look at their stats because of that Week 1 game against Mount Union. But they're certainly a team that's up there. They didn't wow me like they did a season ago with their first half against Waynesburg, but they're still one of the better teams in the conference.
Yeah, and I think it was a bounce-back game for quarterback Lincoln Reyes of Bethany after throwing 4 interceptions the week prior against Westminster. In the first half, 19 for 25 for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, it was major parts to Tyler Ambush and Eric Blinn, who ravaged the injured Waynesburg secondary. Just 5 for 11 was Reyes in the second half for 64 yards, but that's when Jalen Holmes came to his aid. I mean, 29 carries on the day for 121 yards and a touchdown, and the defense definitely rose to the occasion when it needed to, picking Jake Doherty off the end zone in the fourth quarter in a close game, and then thanks to a couple of Waynesburg penalties, survived another jacket drive in Bethany territory. Didn't play a great game, but did enough to get a W. And I think on the road in this, or at home in this contest, you have to account for defensive end Nadeem Radar every time he lines up across your offensive line. As you said, Donovan Hayden, PAC leader in tackles, still have Larry Potier flying all over the field making tackles, but I like freshman defensive back Tyrick Darby. 13 tackles, including a sack and a pass breakup against Waynesburg a week ago. He leads all PAC defensive backs with tackles. I think both of these offenses can beat you in multiple ways using tempo. Just Lincoln Reyes proved 2 weeks ago that he can be turnover prone. Those 4 interceptions against Westminster are the first things that stick out in my mind. So this is a veteran Case Western defense that's proved that it's getting better at forcing turnovers, which wasn't this defense's strong point a year ago. We'll have to see if this Bethany passing offense can start hot like it did last week to keep up with Kuda and his passing attack.
And I think if you're Bethany, you have to break away from that. You passed a lot in the first half against Waynesburg, and then you ran the ball a lot in the second half. I think if you're Bethany against a balanced offense is what I think Bethany needs to do against a much, much better Case Western defense than Waynesburg has right now. So a balanced offense, I think, gives Bethany the opportunity and a better chance in this game against Case.
And the matchup I'm watching, that front 7 for Bethany against the offensive line for Case Western. The front 7 is second in sacks in the PAC. Bethany is with 14, and Kuda's only been sacked 4 times in 3 games. Looking for those numbers.
All right, let's move on to our featured matchup, in which the featured teams are 4-0 when featured as the Football Focus so far this season. The Grove City Wolverines, 0-3, 0-1 in PAC play, at Waynesburg, who's 1-3, 0-2 in PAC play. Waynesburg's won the previous 5 consecutive meetings versus Grove City. It's Waynesburg's homecoming, yet Grove City is still hungry to break its 13-game losing streak after playing competitive football in each of its 3 games to open up the season. Last year, Waynesburg went on the road up to Grove City, Pennsylvania, 135-0, and have shut out Grove City in the last 8 quarters. In last year's matchup, it really didn't break open for Waynesburg. A slow first quarter until Willie Lavelle took a Carter Hill pass, 91 yards for a touchdown to open the second quarter, and then Lavelle added another one later in the quarter, and Waynesburg rolled to victory as Grove City tried everything in the book offensively to generate offense, but netted just 232 yards on the day. Guys, what do we see? Wolverines, Jackets looking for their first PAC win.
Well, really unfortunately for Grove City, I don't think we're going to see Antonio Carosha this week. He didn't finish last week's game after a roughing the passer penalty in the second quarter. Matt Pennypacker came in and replaced him. And Pennypacker's an interesting character. He led Grove City on 3 scoring drives. Unfortunately, he also threw 3 interceptions, including 1 interception returned for a touchdown. He only completed 10 passes, but they were for 216 yards. So he's throwing the ball down the field, threw for 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he had 12 rushes for 105 positive yards, but only 76 net yards in the game. So he looks to be a pretty explosive player, and he's sort of a small guy. He's 6'3", but weighs just about as much as I do. So the 160, 170, that's what he's listed at. So it'll be interesting to see how Waynesburg handles a guy like Pennypacker. Traditionally, Waynesburg has struggled a little bit with mobile quarterbacks, but that's been the last few years, and this is a completely different defense. But Josh Peach and Brett Pinson, they're legit as far as guys on the outside. Josh Peach, top 10 in the PAC in terms of receptions per game. Brett Pinson up there in terms of reception yards per game, second in the PAC with 95.7 yards per game through the air typically, and he catches the ball for big chunks of yardage. 22 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns in the season. That's tied for first in the PAC. Now, Karosha also did throw 7 touchdowns in 2.5 games, but really the problem for Grove City is getting sacked 12 times in 2.5 games. Karosha went down in the backfield, but he was also better than anything the Grove City offense had last year out of the quarterback position. But falling behind early has plagued Grove City. They've been outscored 44-7 in first quarters, and they're only -1 the rest of the game. They've outscored their opponents in the second and third quarters during the season. But offensively, they've hurt themselves more than any other team with a -9 turnover margin, 13 giveaways, most in the PAC, 15 sacks in 3 games. But you're playing against a Waynesburg defense that only has 1 takeaway in this 3-game losing streak. And in the second half, Waynesburg's offense has only put up 14 points in the last 6 quarters. These are 2 teams trying to get back on track.
And when I look at Grove City, if you take away the 3 defensive special teams touchdowns that St. Vincent scored, you technically win the game 28-27, because that would have been the final score at that point. But the thing that Grove City did last week that impressed me in coming into a game against an ailing secondary in Waynesburg, they outgained St. Vincent 449 to 406 yards on the day and threw for 300 yards combined between Pennypacker and Karosha. So 10 for 28 for 216 yards by Pennypacker. As Andy mentioned, Josh Peach, Brett Pinson, 2 of the better receivers right now in the PAC. Against an ailing secondary, we'll see if Grove City can continue that stride it made last week, gaining 400 yards plus yards of offense, 300 yards through the air, and then another 100-some on the ground. And we look at Waynesburg right now. I looked this up. 199th out of 241 teams in Division III in terms of pass defense right now. And last week, only 5 tackles for loss. Forced a fumble and got the fumble recovery, and had 1 sack on Lincoln Reyes on the day. Back-to-back 300-plus yard passers. Haven't lost 3 games in a row since 2006. Haven't lost 4 in a row since 2001. And if they want to win this game, Jerry Lawman has been an effective running back for Waynesburg. He's stayed healthy now through 4 weeks. You cross your fingers if you're a Waynesburg fan that Jerry Lawman continues to stay healthy and runs hard like he has with 19 carries for 87 yards last week. But now we'll have to wait and see if Tim Cooper plays this week. Got injured on a no fair catch punt where he got blown up. Kevin Barnes, though, has been effective. 7 receptions for 80 yards. He continues to impress, and he is Jake Doherty's safety valve right now.
Yeah, and I think Waynesburg is catching Grove City at the right time with Karosha injured. I mean, you hate to see him go down, but it's an advantage for Waynesburg. But if Matt Pennypacker is healthy enough or fares well, or Karosha's healthy enough to play, I think this could be an opportunity for Grove City to rise to the occasion against a team that's really beat them down over the last 2 years. Waynesburg hasn't been good against the bottom tier quarterbacks in this conference, Sheminsky, Channing, and then Reyes. So I think this could be a very favorable opportunity for Grove City. But Waynesburg, so tough against the run. Grove City's been below average in running the ball this year. And on the flip side, I'm really curious to see how Jake Doherty does against a very fundamentally sound Grove City defense. It's not a ball-hawking team like St. Vincent, Thomas More, W&J, Westminster, but the Wolverines are not apt to giving up the big play, especially through the air so far this season. So I agree with you, Sean. It's Jerry Lawman who has a hot start in the season. And Willie Lavelle. If Tim Cooper's hurt, he's yet to accrue 40 or more yards in a game yet this season. He's a PAC, he was a PAC first-team returner and made a big impact in this game last year. So let's see if he can do the same thing against these Wolverines. I think, definitely Kevin Barnes emerging as a playmaker, and with this game calling for 52, that's the high, 90% chance of rain, I think we see heavy doses of the run, quick passes to Kevin Barnes Jr. and Willie Lavelle. Just if Grove City's able to, in a rainy day, they're able to air the ball out with success. Christian Breisinger wearing a sling on campus during the past week. That's another defensive back who could potentially see time off the field. This could be a game that could be close, and that's really hard to believe given how good Waynesburg's been over the last few years and in the basement Grove City's been. This could be a close one.
And I want to see Jake Doherty's progression into this game. He made another big mistake, I'd say, last week with the interception in the end zone against Bethany. In talking to Coach Shepis this week, he said he doesn't think there's any way that they can make life easier for him. It's just time in college snaps, the speed of the game. He needs to go through this thing for a year and see the conference. There's not going to be a replacement for experience and time. And I think this Grove City defense is legit, because in the game against Geneva, a Geneva offense that carved up this Waynesburg defense, Geneva scored twice on short fields off Grove City turnovers, and then 10 consecutive stops by the Wolverines. These guys can play. And really, if it's the weather conditions that they're calling for, you can expect heavy doses of Jerry Lawman, and someone else will probably have to step up in the passing game. You mentioned Tim Cooper potentially being out. Coach Shepis said that in a couple of formations, they're just going to plug Willie Lavelle right in there. He can play that X position, but in some other personnel groupings, it's going to be someone new. Coach Shepis doesn't even know who it is at the beginning of the week, so we'll see if anyone there for Waynesburg steps up and really claims that spot on this team.
And if you're Waynesburg, got to rely on that front seven once again. Last week, Aaron Palmer and Zach Machuga were insanely good against Bethany. 14 tackles for Palmer, 10 tackles for Machuga, and then you have other members on that front line with Jordan Voitis, your mix between Emilio DeStefano, James Roundtree III, Russell Cease has been seeing more time on the defensive line. Brad Grinnan as well. Throw in the linebacking core with John Collier and JC, who Waynesburg fans call. And then you have Tristan Sandrowski, Blake Blaharchek. This front seven is deep, but now it's the secondary's turn to make its strides with an opportunity against one of the teams that are continuing to grow.
Guys, great stuff. Thanks a lot. It's going to be an exciting week 5 in the President's Athletic Conference, highlighted by the action of W&J and Thomas More down in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. But thanks for tuning in here on PAC Athletics. Make sure to tune in next week on the PAC Football Focus. We're talking to head coach Kurt Reiser of Teal College, and we'll take a look back at Week 5 and preview Week 6. Thanks for listening. It's been the pregame show here